let's kick this whole thing off. First, I can't express enough, my thanks that that you're taking time. There's so many, vectors coming in at you as an industry leader right now for your opinions and thoughts. So we're honored to have you here, Brad. I really am indebted to this. What we wanted to do was get your perspectives on the state of people's mental health during these very obvious and very trying times. But I don't want to talk about right now in this moment. We're going to get to that. I actually think there's some more interesting things leading up to this moment that you have played a huge part in. So this is my preface. Now, obviously, I'm like thousands of people every day. They come to Feld Thoughts. That's feld.com, Feld.com. On your writings, your ramblings, your muses, the things that you care viscerally about. The pattern changed I would say, in the last 2 years. Not in you and not in your writings, but a more direct exposure, I should say, on the state of people's mental health. And it's been very eye-opening for someone in your position where historically people like you, and I put that in quotes, can never bat an eyelash. You must maintain a posture to the world because you have to be strong and foundationally not weak and vulnerable. I want to ask you very directly, what inspired you to start this sequence of very deep writings on mental health?
It was probably two things that in some ways are complementary and in some ways oppositional. The first was I felt bored with writing about yet another, here's what you should do as your business. When I started blogging in the mid-2000s, there were only a few, VC bloggers, entrepreneur bloggers. There wasn't a lot of content about, how to build and scale your business, how to raise money, how to think about entrepreneurship. And so there was a lot of open space for that. And so I wrote a lot about that. And I learned a lot from my writing and from the people that I engaged with. And my writing is mostly me thinking out loud. So, I'm less trying to say, here's what you should do. And I'm more trying to work through things that are important to me that are hopefully helpful to others.
Right.
So that was one, was I just got bored of that. And simultaneously, there was an enormous amount of that content. And so every VC had a blog, everybody was writing something about, here's how you scale your SaaS business, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do that, and here's how you raise money. And at some point, it was just more noise in the system from my perspective. At the same time, I've struggled with depression and anxiety my whole life. The clinical diagnosis I have is obsessive compulsive disorder. I've worked through it with therapy and medication in my 20s. And when I was in my 20s, I was incredibly ashamed of everything, of the fact that I was depressed, of the fact that I had OCD, the fact that I saw a therapist, the fact that I took medication. So as a leader then, I was incredibly ashamed and sort of felt that all the time. When I had depressive...
Brad, was that a hidden fact? I mean, here you are having your one-on-ones with your... Right. And
hugely hidden.
Yeah.
The only people in my world in my 20s that really knew that I was depressed, other than my psychiatrist, was my business partner, a guy named Dave Jolk, and my then girlfriend, now wife, Amy Batchelor.
Yeah.
And like my parents were not helpful in that time frame. Like when I talked to them about it, it was one of those things where it just made me more ashamed. And so it was very internal, and it was extraordinarily heavy. I've had multiple other depressive episodes. I had one around 9/11, which was really the tipping point for me into a very deep depression post the collapse of the internet bubble. So I started to learn as I got older, sort of what was triggering these episodes. I was able to manage my OCD. I learned how to do it in therapy in my 20s. And I had a very significant depressive episode in...
Hey, we're losing you for a second, Brad. I'm going to have you repeat that.
Am I back?
You are back. Yes.
Okay, so I'll just go back in time. So I had a very significant depressive episode in 2013, and you were a participant in the trigger of it, which was, if you remember, the trip to
Oh
Slovenia we
God,
had when we were
Slovenia.
roommates, right?
Yes.
You had a
Bedfellows.
dislocated shoulder, and I had at the second to last day I had a terrible bike accident, but it wasn't the
I
bike
remember.
accident that caused it. It was like a whole series of things over the year that wiped me out physiologically. My world was going well. My business was good. My health, generally speaking, was good. My relationship with Amy was good. And I had a couple of I had a near-death experience. I had a kidney stone surgery. I was
I
exhausted.
remember.
And I continued to pretend like I was invincible. I ran a marathon in October after I had the bike accident, like stupid shit. And that corresponded with a couple of high-profile entrepreneurs committing suicide. And it was in 2012, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, what's going on? Why did these people kill themselves?" And they seemed like their lives were so great. And as I was in this depressive episode, because I blog every day, I just started blogging about how I was doing, what I was dealing with, and there was an outpouring of reaction from people, some negative, but a lot positive. And I ended up during that period of time probably talking to at least 100, more than 100 entrepreneurs or business leaders whose names you'd recognize. And many of them, I was the first person they were ever talking to about their struggles with depression. And I realized how intensely deep this stigma was around mental health, especially in the context of business and entrepreneurship, but also in the context of leadership. And, there were a lot of stuff being talked about around authentic leadership and vulnerable leadership. And I just felt like so much of the language was bullshit because people were not allowing themselves to actually be vulnerable. There was a stigma associated with anyone who struggled with any sort of mental health issue. And, we see stigma and health roll through society, right? It wasn't that long ago that if you had cancer, there was massive stigma associated with you. People avoided you. I was in college during the time of HIV and AIDS. Enormous stigma around HIV and AIDS, and not just stigma around somebody who had HIV and AIDS, but also the homophobia that came with it, and the dynamics. And you can even see that playing now into COVID-19 and some of the language around it and the stigma associated with it. Like, I think more of society is rallying the positive way around it. But, we're already seeing things like the China virus.
That's right. I mean,
And that kind of shit is really unhelpful. And so my motivation, like if you go through this long arc for talking about us as humans in the context of being entrepreneurs, leaders, people in technology, has been trying to allow people to understand more about the importance of being authentic and comfortable with yourself, being in that place with your peers and the leaders that you work with, and building sort of relationships where we understand that there's enormous stressors upon us, and there's lots of things we can do to help mitigate some of those stressors. So that was the motivation.
That is incredibly interesting. I know we walk the razor's edge. I'm about to click the odometer into 50. And, when I look back, at strong examples of those in my past, my father being one of them, worked at, institutionally at a huge company, Chevron Oil, for 40 years. And this is what you did. And you were a metronome. You never shirked your responsibilities. You rarely showed any weak sides. And I'm not giving you a false impression that my dad was John Wayne. Of course not. I've seen him cry. But the reality is that the pattern, the model was way different. And I someday I will write about the sociological and historical impacts of what is happening to society. I look at the world as in those periods, my dad's periods, your dad's periods, you had these long sine waves of ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of life. The seasons were the same. The business challenges were generally the same. And then those frequencies in the late 80s, early 90s, and then 2000s started to vacillate so wildly that it really, you can see humanity just not able to take the onslaught of left, right, left, right, left, right. this is exacerbated by the input that we have of data. And I use that term loosely, just streams of information that never gives the mind a nanosecond to rest and be peaceful. So it's just, God, it's just, you when you combine those things, think about what an entrepreneur in a leadership position gets to. They have these old school mentalities of I can't show weakness, with this massive input of data of making real-time corrections on an hour-by-hour basis to save their company in many ways. It's not a winnable situation without help. So, and people just need to know where to get that.
I think it was extremely well said. I like the language at the end. It's not a winnable situation without help. And, you can get help from multiple places, but the powerful starting places are the people that you're directly connected to.
Yeah.
Your family and your work colleagues and your friends. And there's lots of mechanisms for that. But if you think about even the mechanisms for that and how those mechanisms have been so polluted with the endless instant on information, or the endless, charade is a tough word. I like it and I don't like it, but I'm going to use it. The charade of either normalcy, negativeness, or positiveness. And nothing about our daily life is, quote, normal ever anymore. Maybe it never was. Everybody's daily life has its own unique characteristics, ups and downs. And look, you don't have to do any work to recognize that there's no real source of truth. If you question that statement, I encourage you to spend an hour today alternating between every 15 minutes between Fox News and CNN. just do 15 minutes of CNN, 15 minutes of Fox News, 15 minutes of CNN, 15 minutes of Fox News. And what you'll recognize is there is no single source of truth.
Right.
And that, if you think about just in the United States, roughly half of the United States has a point of view about what the single source of truth comes from. And the 50% has a different point of view. And there's all kinds of layers in all of that. And then combined with all the other shit that comes at us all the time, just in the context of the macro news, forget about what's going on in your neighborhood, what's going on in your city, what's going on in your community, what's going on in your church, what's going on in your company. And our brains are not able to consume all of this continuously and be able to do it, no matter how good you are at processing information. Physiologically, your brain just can't do it on an endless basis. I mean, it's one of the reasons we have to sleep.
That's right.
But it's also,
if you can,
but it's also one of the reasons why so many behaviors and so many things that we do are harmful to us, because they negatively impact how our brains process this information, which then causes us to feel worse, and then causes us to make decisions that are not good decisions, which then compound on themselves. And oh, by the way, think about the number of you that are listening to this that are thinking about something that you could have done 2 weeks ago, and you didn't do it. And intellectually, you can't time travel back 2 weeks and do something about it. That intellectually, but yet your brain still goes back. Oh, I wish I had.
Mm-hmm.
If only I had done this, if only I had done that. And then the same thing about the current wish. I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that. You think about how much space in your brain that's taking. And if it's not taking very much, awesome. If it's taking, any amount where you're aware of it, that's clogging up your ability to process what's happening and what's coming at you.
Interesting. Here's my lesson that has been forced in front of my face, Brad, in these last n number of days, last 2 weeks. I have an Amy. You have an Amy.
Yes.
My Amy is the most grounded. If I'll use the word spiritual, but in a meditative sense, and in a sense where she began her journey many, many years ago to help people. She is, a well-known massage therapist, a Reiki master, and just had this sort of inherent to her bloodstream. Here's what I've learned. Imagine that blessing that I was given. This woman that chose me in this house now, raising our children. My realization was I have been drawing from her like a fucking ATM, her energy to help me. The realization that I'm going through in, with this whole COVID-19 punch in the gut is how can I push back, provide back, give back to that one piece of stabilization that, I can't feel like I cannot pull from her anymore. You know what I mean? Managing a business, trying to raise kids, like all the things that, a non-self-aware, self-absorbed entrepreneur feels that they need to do. This is the moment where you just step back, and this is about life and death. And I hate to sound that theatrical, but it is. And there is no tomorrow potentially. And that is what I'm taking away from all of this, living inside of our house together and finding these moments again. Think of it like COVID forced dating. It's awesome.
Well, I think it can be very powerful. And there's very tactical things you can do. If you have a significant other, certainly, I don't have kids, so I'm very hesitant to give people advice about kids, but some things I've heard from, people that I work with, especially at Foundry, who have kids and the things that they're doing. And the increasing conversation, since, we're in a mode where both college and schools around the country are going to be closed for, a chunk of time, maybe through the end of the semester. Certainly for college, probably for high school and elementary school for many, many places. Things that you can start to learn how to do in that reality, not just of having your kids at home, but also still trying to have some kind of educational vector for them, against a country and a society that doesn't really have great implemented distance learning, right? There's a lot of companies that are trying to do distance learning, but there's just not sort of a canonical approach.
It's true.
In the background of all that, one of the things immediately you can do in the context of your relationship with a partner, and this is also helpful for your relationship with yourself, is to take a deep breath, take a pause, and think hard about small behavior changes that you could make that would be meaningfully impactful to your partner. So let me give you an example. Let me give you a couple of examples. One from my own life. Again, remember, we don't have kids. Our dogs wake us up pretty early in the morning. I used to get up every morning at 5. Now I sleep till I wake up. Generally, Amy can't fall back asleep after she wakes up. So generally, the dogs will wake her up. She goes and she takes care of the dogs, and I wake up whenever I do. Could be 30 minutes later, could be an hour later, could be 2 hours later. We both are good sleepers, but we have to get to bed relatively early to get a full night's sleep. And if her sleep is interrupted, she has a hard time falling back asleep. If she isn't interrupted, she sleeps really soundly through the night. The last 2 nights, I've been very wound up at the end of the day because of the intensity of the day. We usually go to sleep not between 9 and 10. We've both been exhausted, but I've been wound up. And so for the last 2 nights, I have not been very thoughtful about crawling into bed when she crawls into bed. And so each night I'm interrupting her sleep, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours after she's gone to bed. And I realized it this morning, and I apologized. And I said, okay, I'm going to, independent of where my head's at, I'll crawl into bed with you at the same time so that, it's, even if I'm just laying there wound up, I can meditate in bed. I know how to do that. I can calm down. I don't have to get that last thing done. There might be once a week where there's an emergency going on that I have to sort of stay on when she's done and ready to go to bed, but just changing that behavior. Another example of something that we've done for a very long time as a couple is we do something called 4 minutes in the morning. And the way my mornings roll now, I won't describe how they used to roll, but the way they roll now is I wake up, I go to the bathroom, I brush my teeth, I meditate for about 20 minutes, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, depending on, sometimes I do silent, sometimes I do guided. I come upstairs, I make a cup of coffee, and then we sit on the couch together for 4 minutes. And we've organized that around my morning ritual. It actually used to be the opposite because I used to wake up before Amy. And those 4 minutes are usually just sitting. We might talk about something, she's already been at some stuff. And so she, has some things in her head. Maybe we're talking about the day ahead of us. Sometimes we're just sitting there holding hands, drinking coffee. But it's a sort of grounding moment as the day begins. Another example is one of the guys that works for us says that he's got 2 teenage kids. And what they've decided to do, they have dinner together. They're having all 3 meals together. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So he carves out in his day, here's my 30 minutes for lunch and here's my dinner time. And after dinner, they're doing a game as a family.
Yeah, we started this too. That's awesome.
Right? So every night, and he says, we've got a lot of board games, so we're going to run out of them at some point. We'll have to figure out some other games. But it's like, I could go back to my work. I could go back to my whatever. My computer's right there. But I'm going to just have this conscious mode shift for me and for my family so that me, my family can be together. Now, if you're alone, you live alone, you don't have a significant other, you don't have a family, you can do that mode shift anyway. And you can do that mode shift by video with friends or family.
That's right.
My dad turned 82 the other day on Tuesday, on St. Patrick's Day. We did a birthday party with him, with Daniel, my brother, and his wife and kid, and Amy and I and my parents on Zoom.
So good. Incredible. Right? I actually, I saw your post. That made me smile.
So it's trying to introduce the semblance of normalcy and think about how you would normally live your life, but in some ways overcorrect to make sure that those things happen, because it's so easy for those things to default away.
That's right.
The last one on this thread that I think is really important that Amy pointed out to me, multiple times in our relationship, and I think we're pretty good about it as a couple. But she pointed out to me again as something that was coming up she's on the board of Wellesley College, and she's involved in a number of things that are, I would say, women-centric. Not surprisingly, the normal sort of gender dynamic is already introducing itself into this mix, where even though men and women are now at home as a couple, and I'm talking, of course, about a heterosexual couple, but the men and women are at home, the home responsibilities are defaulting to the woman. And even if both parents are working parents. And
that's interesting.
Right. And it's societal gender norms that are not super healthy, but it's an interesting one to talk about. And in my house, there's super specific things, right? It would be very easy for me never to load or unload the dishwasher. It would be very easy for me never to load or unload the washing machine.
Yes.
And then there's a handful of things that Amy doesn't want to do. And what we're doing, instead of just defaulting, we're being explicit. If she wants me to load and unload the dishwasher because I haven't paid attention to it, she's comfortable saying something about it. But I'm actually consciously on certain days of the week, basically every other day, paying attention to things like that. I say, okay, what are the things that she is doing by default that if I do on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, will make, she doesn't even have to know I do it, but it'll just take a relief off of her.
Yeah.
So, and I say that every couple has its own dynamics. It's across a whole bunch of different things. Having the deliberate conversation as a couple versus just defaulting into what your normal patterns are is very healthy in this moment.
I think that's clever. I'll give you a secret, Brad. My obsession, but potentially my OCD. I have to pack the dishwasher and do the laundry because it only can be so organized. Way? Absolutely.
Good. Well, you're Amy's ahead of that gender curve. So
Amy, I'll be right over. I got this. Let's use that as sort of inspiration to talk about this next subject. Let's sort of turn our sights on our corporate environment in this situation, because a lot of what we just discussed, which is deeply personal, and I appreciate that, really sort of migrates into the workplace, and we're all going through this. We're learning how to basically have a new work pattern that uses video, just like you and I are doing now. I mean, this is not new. We all work from home at some capacity when we need to, but there's something additional about this new environment. I want to ask, how do you see across your portfolio companies or in the conversations you're having with the leaders in your companies, the work-life balance now? Like, how they're at home. What could they be doing in order to preserve that work-life balance? That people use their commute as meditation time. Right now, we're sort of in this weird state. I'm finding myself, roughly 7 to 9 because I'm here. I'm just grinding through, and my wife is like, "Honey, get away," and she is teaching me. What are you seeing companies doing right now that could be helpful for others to hear new practices, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tactical things going around. I presume y'all are seeing some of the listicles of here's the best practices for working at
Right.
home and
Of
remote
course.
workforce, stuff like that. So I'll try to stay away from those.
Yep.
For From my frame of reference, there's two paths. One path is company path, and one path is personal path. But they're interlinked. We talked a lot about some personal path stuff, but we didn't really talk about it in the context of work. One of the things that's really effective in the context of work is figuring out what your own boundaries are, and allowing there to be a cultural norm within your company for those boundaries. So, for example, if you normally commute for 30 minutes to your office, and you don't generally check email until you get to your office, and that's a norm, block that time on your calendar as out of office. And even though you wouldn't normally schedule, 7 a.m. to 8:30 or 8:45 as out of office, whatever it is, block it so that everybody else in your company knows that, if that's a company norm, right? So that everybody across the company knows when people are not available. If you're using Slack, right, set your away
Yep.
for periods of time. Like, consciously say, look, I have been working this way for a long time. I'm going to keep working this way. Now, if you have a work culture where you wake up in the morning and before you head to work, everybody checks their email, and does an email pass and then heads to work, whatever the culture is, try to figure out how to maintain those norms.
Be consistent. Yeah.
Just be consistent, even though you're no longer having to commute and having to do whatever. Define as a company norms around family time, knowing that people have their kids in their house, and that the 3 meals a day that you're now having with your family are really 3 meals a day that you're having with your family, and make sure that the work norms are such that everybody understands what the rules of engagement are around that. And that includes things like block out times for scheduling meetings, right? Internal meetings all of a sudden shouldn't find themselves being able to be scheduled at times that ordinarily people wouldn't have scheduled because of, dinner or whatever. So just sort of be explicit as an organization about those things that help with people individually, and individually try to reinforce, here are the norms that I'm used to that are important to me. Then recognize that one of the things that happens in an office environment is that you do have a lot of slack time. Slack's the wrong word. You have a lot of unstructured time in between things. You have unstructured time in between meetings. You get up and go to the bathroom. You might go for a bike ride in the middle of the day. You might go for a walk. You might go out to lunch with a couple of people. You are going to have extended periods of work where you're not interrupted. So you're not online, even if you're, in the office, but you're trying to get something done, you have your headphones on. Like, figure out how to make sure you're still preserving those activities in the context of work, because it becomes very easy. I mean, I've scrapped this week in the context of being overscheduled and said, okay, this week I'm just going to be scheduled from the time I start to the time I finish. But even next week, I'm starting to build in some time in the calendar. So I have some breaks for myself as I've gotten reoriented around things. I think that's really useful across the company. At Foundry, we did two things specifically for that. One is from 4:30 to 5 every day, We have an open Zoom channel for all Foundry employees. Now we're small, we're only 15 people.
Yeah.
But everybody at Foundry that's now working at home can hop on that line. And not everybody's required, it's optional. And I'd say, we started at Monday, I'd say this week, today's Thursday, 75% of the people, and it's different. Like some people were on yesterday that weren't on the day before. And it's not structured, it's just 30 minutes. We're hanging out. Hey, how you doing? We started telling knock jokes today, which is something we would never do in the office. Like we never get together from 4:30 to 5 and just hang out in a conference room and tell knock jokes. That's not our culture. But we added that in, and I think it gives everybody a chance to feel really connected to each other in a way that's useful. And whether you do that company-wide or you do that with your team that you're part of, if you're a manager, you make sure that your team has that time, and it's not work. Right? I mean, if there's an urgent thing, maybe you could use it for that. You could repurpose it for that. But it's just a chance for people to virtually connect emotionally with each other. We're then doing the same thing from 5 to 6 p.m. Mountain Time every day for all the CEOs in our portfolio, which is about 80 people. And it's totally optional. If you want to come. And we know it's 5 to 6 Mountain Time, which is, 4 to 5 California time, but later on the East Coast. So we just chose a time and we said, look, we know there's no good answer to the time here. And so if you can come, once a week, show up. If you don't ever want to come, don't show up. And it's been fascinating. Again, same kind of thing. You don't have to stay for an hour, come for 5 minutes. We had a few people that showed up and said 5 minutes, said hi, just want to say hi to everybody. Hey, Dan, good to see you. How's Seattle? Oh, we're all pretty locked down here in Seattle.
Yeah.
Everybody doing okay? Yeah, we're doing okay. Okay, see ya. Like it can just be that.
It's really true. It's reminiscent of one of my favorite movies, War Games, where after the drill, they if you remember the scene where they had to see if the world actually blew up, and you hear all the voices come up. Houston, I'm okay. Yeah. Seattle, we're okay.
Yeah, exactly right.
I'm feeling like,
It's just, it creates this time and space connection without an agenda.
Yeah.
Because we're so agenda driven, our brains are so wired into the agenda. And look, from a work perspective, JumpCloud's an interesting company because JumpCloud could, from a business perspective, this is probably a positive for the business, not a negative for the business.
Right.
In the context of the importance of the product that you guys that y'all have in the context of distributed infrastructure. That doesn't, I have no predictive power on that at all. I have no sense what that means in terms of where your business goes. Of course. But it's very different than, for example, a restaurant where or a restaurant chain. Can you imagine Yum Foods right now? Which owns a bunch of franchises and a bunch of direct restaurants. Like that's a distressed world, or an airline. That's a distressed world. It's different. And in some ways, the people involved in businesses need that same sense of normalcy, and they're not going to get it.
Yeah.
And so to the extent that within your company, you can create that culture for each other, that actually will start to bleed over into other places in a positive way.
Totally agree. Yeah, on that last point, I'm not here to give quote forward-looking statements, but JumpCloud or companies like this, we're in this interesting moment in time where we're sort of seeing the concept of need versus want, like need to have versus want, and from an entrepreneurial's perspective, when these moments and what the market is currently doing is it's really exposing a light on those things that aren't required in this moment. I mean, they're very nice to have, peripherally speaking. JumpCloud, I think, is seeing a pattern of we kind of need this to enable things like work from home and other things. But I think what you're moving our company aside, it's going to really provide a lens of validating your business hypothesis when a young entrepreneur wants to go and build something. Is it a feature? Is it a product? Or am I building a categorical shift into a need to have? Like, these are the new thinks, the big thinks that I think are going to inspire a lot of great entrepreneurial thought after we get out of this. Which leads me to one sort of some closing stuff. I want to get a sense of what you, I mean, Brad, at the expense of me sounding cheesy for a second, you are looked upon. You're an industry leader, and we're in a very particular moment here where people are looking for various forms of guidance. I would ask you this, like, what would you say to entrepreneurs pushing hard on their young nascent businesses in moments like this? I mean, you've lived through, the post year college, coming into a very, very tough time in the late 80s, early 90s. You lived through, obviously, the dot-com, sort of implosion, 9/11, 2008, and so on. And, you found resilience. I mean, clearly, it came with pain too. What would you say to people now in this moment, entrepreneurs pushing hard on their businesses?
I'll try not to sound like a prognosticator,
Right.
because I think that's of no use to anybody. Understand that this is my belief system. We live on this planet for a finite period of time, and we have a finite number of things that we can do in that finite period of time. And our current work is one of those things. It might be the only thing. It doesn't have to be. As an entrepreneur, you may be working on your first business, or you may be working on your 8th business. If you're working on your 8th business, you probably had the experience of some businesses succeeding and some businesses failing.
Yeah.
If you're working for an entrepreneurial company and it's the first company you're working for, that's different than if this is the 6th or 7th or 8th or 10th company you've worked for, where you've probably had the experience of some businesses succeeding and some businesses failing. From a business perspective, that's normal. There's nothing unique in this moment about succeeding or failing as a business. The dynamics are intensified and accelerated, and the decisions that you make as a leader matter a lot because of the very rapidly changing context around you. But the dynamics of success or failure are no different. And so the emotion, your own attributing emotion to that, other than the fact that it's compressed in time, is really no different. So start with that. Same thing about mortality, right? I mean, I'm 54. You said you're about 50. At 54, you, for better or for worse, I like to say you have to accept that you've probably got more of your life that you've lived than you're going to live.
Yes.
Right? Somebody challenged me on that about 3 months ago. I said, don't you think you're going to make it past 108? And I would love to send them a note now and say, so what do you think? Do you think that 108 is still in the future?
Yeah.
And, we should be all worried about the pandemic. We should be worried about COVID-19. We should be worried about our health. We should be worried about the health and safety of our loved ones. But it is a finite experience that we have. And so the actions that we take right now in this moment are the ones that are the ones that actually are happening, not the ones we're defending against in the future. Oh my God, I'm afraid my company's going to fail. Oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to die. Oh my God, I'm afraid my parents going to die.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, those things are actually going to happen. And so the company fail or succeed, who knows? Right? But it could happen. Focusing on that and putting your emotional and mental energy into those things, it's just a negative cycle. And it's very hard. There are moments, and we come to sort of, okay, I'm thinking about that. What do I do? Right? As humans, we're naturally wired to have, people I'm sure are aware of this on this podcast or this video, flight or fight response. Like, that's natural. Like, we're DNA wired to either fight or run away when confronted with fear, when confronted with stimuli. Interestingly, there are so many ways to calm your central nervous system when it gets revved up. The simplest, and let's do it for 60 seconds altogether, is literally to sit here, close your eyes, and breathe. And we're not going to say anything for the next 60 seconds. Everybody just sit and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Think whatever thoughts you want to have. They're just thoughts. don't have to do anything with them for the next 45 seconds. Just breathe in. You only have 2 assignments. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Slowly open your eyes. If you were a Fitbit or a Whoop or an Apple Watch, my bet is that your resting heart rate just went down 10 beats.
Oh,
You only have to do it for more than a minute, a couple of times a day. And I'll give you another trick. My guess is you had a bunch of thoughts running through your head. I had plenty running through my head. And they could have been thoughts like, this is so stupid, or gosh, I should do this more, or why is my nose runny, or I need to finish watching this on 1.5x so I can get back to my email. Or my kid started pulling on my sleeve while I was doing that. How do I deal with my kid being at home? Whatever the thoughts are, right? My thoughts were, I'm pretty good at knowing what a minute is, but I didn't start a timer. So I wonder if people are going to actually judge me when it's only 54 seconds or 63 seconds.
Awesome.
Right? Whatever the thoughts are, just have them. And what I do with the thoughts, and it's a meditation technique, but I think you can do it in moments of real stress, even without meditating. I'll give you the metaphor. It's just realizing their thoughts, that it's a narrative you're creating in your head. It has nothing to do with anything you have to do anything about. If any of you have ever used Headspace, you'll recognize this metaphor. It's in the first or second lesson of Headspace. I think it's the very first one, where Andy, who's the moderator, is sort of talking about what meditation is. And he said, imagine you're sitting on a bench on the side of a busy highway. You're just sitting on the bench and cars are going by. Sometimes there's a bunch of cars. Sometimes there's a gap between cars. Sometimes there's only one car. Some are going fast. Some are going slower. Some are passing each other. Some are green. Some are blue. Some are black. Some are white. Some are fancy. Some are junkers.
Yeah.
You're just watching the cars. The cars are going by. Oh, that's a car. Oh, that's a car. Oh, that's a car. Oh, that's a blue car. Oh, that's a red car. What you're not doing is you're not jumping out in the middle of traffic trying to stop the cars.
Yeah, that's interesting metaphor.
Right? You're not out there. You're seeing the cars. They're going to go by. Your thoughts are going to happen. You're not trying to make them go away. You're not trying to get to this blissful state where you don't have those anxious and scary and difficult thoughts. But you don't have to take action on them. You don't have to make them stop. You don't have to make them do something different. You don't have to remember them and write them down. You don't have to create more tasks for yourself. When you have the same thought 20 times, instead of feeling like, oh my God, I got to get rid of this thought, deconstruct it. Why am I having this thought? What is it that's going on that's causing me to keep having this thought? Is it something I should do something about? Or is it me just having this thought over and over again? Right? And so this idea that you're observing your thoughts rather than being in the middle of the highway, dodging them, trying to grab them, trying to toss them off the road, trying to fix the broken ones, trying to make the blue ones green.
Yeah, interesting.
And even just slowing down a couple of times a day and letting yourself have that deep breath, even for a couple of minutes, it changes the tenor. Even in this conversation, right? Greg, think about the tenor change just in our interaction. I mean, I know I'm talking at you now. It just slows it down. And that allows you to have some clarity that you might not otherwise have.
Incredible. You know what? You just invoked a memory. I read a book. I don't know if you have. It's called 10% Happier.
Yep. It's a great book. And it's, by the way, it's a great app. Dan
I
Harris?
don't
And
know the app. I'll have to look at that. But your car metaphor was his behind the waterfall metaphor, and getting your mind to appreciate, watching the water fall. Those are the cars in your analogy. And you will have moments where you feel impulse to walk through that waterfall and out to the other side. And in doing so, getting rained upon, and it's all blurry and messy. And yeah, what a good, I really am going to gravitate towards your metaphor. I appreciate that. But listen, I'm looking at you in the eyes. Yes, this is virtual. You're a dear friend. And I think the time that you've been able to spend with me personally is now going to help so many that will be listening and or watching this. And I'm indebted, Brad. I really am. I appreciate this time with you.
totally my pleasure. So let's end with two things. One is, the new hello.
Yeah, I can't. Here, let me do that. I
We
got
just have
broken fingers.
put your thumb out so that your fingers will close. That'll help you actually if you leave your thumb out.
Oh, look at that.
No, yeah. So you get
Can't,
not quite.
I'm going to tape it together.
Close enough. Close enough.
Yeah.
And the other is that we actually can touch.
Yes.
We actually can touch. Put your hand up against well, I'm not against the picture, right? If you put your hand out, you got me. There you go. You got me. So yeah, it's not the same, but it's kind of the same. It's taking a moment to say, hey, I'm connected to you.
I appreciate that. Thanks for being beautiful. And
you too. Thanks for letting me do this, and everybody be safe and healthy.
Will do. Tell my best to your Amy, and I'll do likewise to mine.
And here's to Amy as well.
Cheers, my friend.
Yeah.
Bye.